What's up, everybody? Cinephile Mike here, and today I am joined by filmmaker Katie Camosy to discuss her feature directorial debut, Gaslit. This documentary follows activist and Academy Award winner Jane Fonda as she travels through Texas and Louisiana, meeting the people and communities confronting the growing impact of fossil fuel expansion and LNG, liquefied natural gas production, along the Gulf Coast. Katie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you, Mike. I'm glad to be here.
So, you've worked on environmental storytelling and climate focused projects for years through your work with Greenpeace. But what was it about this particular story and these communities that made you feel this needed to become your first feature documentary?
Yeah, thanks for that. So there are, stories of people living near polluting industry and having climate related stories, impacts in their life. They're happening everywhere, of course. But what really struck me when I went down to the US Gulf Coast, so we're talking Texas and Louisiana, was really the scale of it. So you've got these huge terminals, these huge refineries, visible pollution, invisible pollution. And it wasn't just like, oh, there's somebody here or a community there who's having trouble. It felt like it was everywhere I went. It was just story after story of how this was impacting health, impacting people's jobs, and really just their way of life.
And one thing I appreciated about this film is that it deals with very dense scientific and industrial terminology, but it never feels inaccessible.
Okay.
So as you were structuring, I'm not a science person, but I was able to follow. As you were structuring the documentary, how did you approach balancing information, emotional storytelling, and clarity for audiences who aren't as familiar with this world?
Yes, that's something, I spent a lot of time thinking about before, this is my feature directorial debut. Before this, I was making a lot of short form content. And when you're doing short form content, you kind of avoid a lot of the terminology because you don't have the space to explain it and you don't want to confuse people, turn them off to the storytelling. But because it's a feature, we were able to have these short, like 30-second animations that are like, here's what you need to know, here's what's going on underground. Here's what fracking actually is, and then kind of almost get that out of the way to hear the stories from the people who are impacted and really get to the human storytelling aspect.
And speaking of that human storytelling aspect, so you've previously collaborated with Jane Fonda through the Fire Drill Fridays, but this is a much larger and more expansive project. What was the collaboration process like between the two of you in shaping how you would guide audiences through the film?
It was really unique. So Jane was there from before we started. We came up with the idea together. We had just gone to Port Arthur, Texas, which is on the Gulf, right on the Texas-Louisiana border. And we both met John Beard, who you'll see in the film, and heard his story about the plastic production, but also all of these gas terminals. And it was really shocking. So at first we thought, let's collect more of these stories. And as we were doing that, we thought this is really one story. We want to be able to connect the dots to show why this is happening, how we can stop it. At one point we even go to Germany in it. And Jane was really there for 3 years of filming through the edit. She's quite an activist herself. I've admired her my whole life,
Yeah.
and she really
Same.
walks the walk. She wasn't just, a name. She's there for all of it.
And so it's interesting you referenced that she was there through the whole month through the edit. That was my next question. We're introduced to so many different individuals and communities, from activists to ranchers to former oil workers, fishermen, fisherwomen, all approaching these issues from the different perspectives. So, how did you and Jane and Laura Franco Velasco, your editor, determine which stories would anchor the film?
Yeah, thanks for calling out Laura. I mean, this was a beast to edit. She actually came, our editor, Laura Franco Velasco, came to the shooting as well, which really helped. But yeah, so when we first went, I thought, okay, we're gonna meet a bunch of people. I'll just pick a few and then we'll focus on them. But I quickly realized that there's power in seeing all these people. For one,
Mhm.
we've got folks from all kinds of backgrounds across the political divide. So you can't write off one or two people. You're like, wow, this is
Right.
happening to everyone. These are happening to unlikely allies who would normally not
Yeah.
agree on anything. And so once
Mhm.
we kind of decided that, It was a big swing because you want to get to know the people and kind of have an emotional moment, but it is episodic in the way you're like a road trip, you're traveling along. So Laura did an incredible job. I worked with her on that. And then Jane really understood when we were filming that her role is to be like an audience avatar. So we're going to different locations, we're meeting all these people. Jane helps us be like, okay, here's what we need to know, here's where we are in the process, here's where we're going next. And I think, I mean, she did an incredible job, of course. Yeah.
And as you were filming and spending time with these communities, was there anything that you learned or witnessed that genuinely changed the way you approached or understood the documentary itself?
I mean, really a lot. So when we first went out, we were looking at people's stories right now. We have this LNG, liquefied natural gas exports. It's a new thing. So we're like, let's look at the situation now. But I quickly realized that we can't talk about what's happening now without looking at the decades, really like the last century of industry taking advantage of this area and treating it like a sacrifice zone. So we got out there, we were meeting Diane, that fisherwoman that you mentioned. And then we were actually at the same time digitizing Greenpeace's archival footage. So they had things on mini DV tape and other formats that never made it online. And we were able to digitize those, and we found some of the people from decades ago. Um, Also talking to Greenpeace, also talking about industrial pollution. So at first I thought, how incredible. Then I wondered, is this going to make people feel like, well, what's happened? It's just gotten worse after all these years. So we really thought about it. But I think what's different now is that all these people are connected that you see in the film. And it does feel like there's a way now to stop a lot of this and to get the attention because the people in the film are united. But I gotta say, it was shocking just to see, all the pipelines, all the infrastructure from companies that no longer existed now mixed with the new stuff. There's leaks, I mean, there's so much going on there. It's really a shame.
And with that, I have to bring one more person into the conversation here because
Yeah.
you mentioned in your director's statement that one of the challenge was making something largely invisible, right? Pollution and emissions work within a visual medium unless you're looking through those cameras with your methane hunters. And wow.
Yep.
But so when you talk about that with the factories and the industry and all these shots, what conversations were you having with your cinematographer, Josh Gibson, to create imagery that could still communicate the scale and emotional weight of what these communities are living alongside?
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? And I've really experienced it for the last 10 years doing environmental work. You've got the pipelines underground, you've got the methane gas you can't see. It's also, we're out there in West Texas and the oil and gas fields. It's very cinematic looking. Josh would say, I point the camera anywhere. It looks epic. Like we've got that. But to show the industry is a challenge also because they're not allowing us to come on and film inside their facilities and things like that. But a lot of it is huge in scale. So we were able to use drones. You're allowed to stay above public roads. So we were always very careful to stay on public property, but we got a lot of vantage points from that. That's obviously a lot easier now than it used to be. And then, what we can't see and what we can't get inside of these facilities, I thought, let's go for the emotional stories instead. So we spend a lot of time hearing people's stories and getting to know them instead of just looking at, disaster footage or explosions. There is some of that in there, but we didn't want to lean into that. We wanted to lean into the human element always. That was our North Star.
And and to that, one thing I found interesting is that this film it doesn't offer like easy answers or a neat resolution, but it does still maintain that sense of hope through the people that are involved and headed for that North Star. So how important was it to, balance the urgency with the humanity and resilience to not just come across as like beating you over the head with the issue?
Yeah, so you'll see some stories of people winning in this film. Diane Wilson has the largest citizen lawsuit using the Clean Water Act. to stop a plastic company from polluting plastic pellets into the ground and into the water. In Wallace, you see Joe and Joy Banner, who've been able to keep industry out of their community. So we have some blueprints, right? And I also think just by seeing all the ways that people in the film are fighting this, some are using the law, some are organizing through faith groups, others using the science, like that thermal camera you mentioned, and going to regulators about that. So, I'm very inspired by the people doing this, and I think we can all look at, what can we do for the industry in our neighborhoods. My contribution is this film Gaslit. But I also was careful not to make it sound like, oh, these people have it, we don't need to do anything, because that's just not true, right? We got to make some big changes, and there isn't a single silver bullet. There's a lot that can be done. You can go to our website, gaslitdoc.com. We've got there all the calls to action for the people in the film, but also larger ones nationally and globally. And I always encourage people to get involved. When I started at Greenpeace a decade ago, and we were talking about climate change, the opposition were deniers, and it's kind of changed. So now the opposition are really like doomers. That's this climate
Mm.
doomerism, saying that like, okay, it is real, but it's too big, it's too late, we can't do anything. And I do think that's just as dangerous as the denial. So, as much as we want to show how urgent and severe the issue is, and it is, there are very real things to do to improve this, and we could start tomorrow if we get the political will, the social will, and demand that it happens.
Yes, I'm like,
As easy as
yes.
that,
It's easy as
right?
that.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations again. So now I have to ask this question. Now that you have completed your first feature film, again, congrats.
Thank you.
As you prepare, I'm sure you've got a million ideas clicking in your head about what's going to be next. I love to ask this question, especially for first time filmmakers. What would you say is one best practice that you learned working on this project that you want to carry with you into the next? And one learning curve you want to try not to repeat?
Oh, very good. Um, So yeah, one thing that worked really well is we were able to keep the same small crew. You mentioned Josh and Laura, Alana Schwartz was also there, and Caleb Kuntz. We were able to come out to almost every single shoot with the same team, which was partly because the people on the crew believe in the project and would just prioritize it and make it happen. Um, that was really incredible because it's over 500 hours of footage, but I do think the editing was helped so much by the consistency. So that's something I definitely would want to do again. In terms of a learning curve to do it differently, we could have used more time on the edit. I could always use more time. There's that saying, if I had more time, I'd write a shorter book. I love how it came out, but there's still more pieces of this that I want to do, and I hope that we can, get some funding and show more of the stories that couldn't make it in online. I'd love to build that in next time because, I looked at all that old footage from a Greenpeace crew 30 years ago, and we're picking through it now, and I am thinking who's going to be picking through our raw footage later, and I hope that they're telling a story of how we won things and how we improved, when they're going through those 500 hours.
So, one last question before I have to let you go. When audiences finish Gaslit, what's something you hope stays with them afterward, whether emotionally, intellectually, or even personally?
I mean, there's a lot, but I'll try to keep it brief. I hope that people question the promises of industry that want to come into their communities. Time and again, I heard people say that they were promised these great jobs and then the jobs wouldn't be permanent, that it would be safe and then they're just paying the fees for the air pollution. I really hope that we question, question, question and demand proof and get justice from companies that are endangering the health, the lives, the jobs of people. And then I also hope on the other side, on the hopeful side, that people see the strength that so-called everyday people can have. I think a lot of us are frustrated with many of our political leaders right now, but I'm inspired by the people in this film who are making change on their own.
Excellent. Well, Katie, thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Congratulations on Gaslit. For
Thank
everyone watching, Gaslit premieres in theaters in New York on June 12th and Los Angeles on June 19th. We will include information about the film, the film's website, where you can learn more about getting tickets in the descriptors below. As always, if you enjoyed this conversation, please make sure to comment, like, and subscribe for more filmmaker interviews like this, festival coverage, spoiler-free reviews, and award season conversations. You can find my spoiler-free review of Gaslit on my website, cinephilemike.com. Until next time, remember, take a break and watch something new. Katie, have a wonderful day.
you too. Thank you, Mike.